Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and today I want to share with you the books and resources and projects that we did for our Golden Age of Islam main lesson block or unit study. Now, this is a very long unit study spanning many weeks, actually months. And since we did not get through the entire unit study, I am sharing with you the materials that we completed and how we liked them. But for a complete review of all of the materials that we have used, as well as all of the projects that we did, I encourage you to check out the blog post that accompanies this video, because you're going to find more up-to-date information as we continue through this unit, not just currently, but also in the future when we revisit this material. So I want to share with you first off the lesson plans, because this was not included in how we put together this unit. So the way that I structure our video content and our blog posts for my YouTube channel and for the Pepper and Pine website is that I will have a video or blog post that includes how we're putting together our unit and or main lesson block. And a lot of times they include a lot of resources, projects, and books. And when I'm initially putting together the unit, those are things that I have not used yet. Then we work through our unit, we will read the books, we will complete our main lessons for that unit, and we will do our projects. And then at the end of the unit, I will come back and share with you what we did, how we enjoyed our resources, what we actually got through, what we didn't get through, and why. Now, at the end of the video, or rather at the end of the unit, is where you really get to see how these materials actually worked within our homeschool, which kinds of materials we want to use again, and how we enjoyed them. And this is really probably a more important view or a more important video when looking at the resources, because when we're initially putting together the unit, we're using all these resources that I've collected, yet I don't really know much about them until we work through them. As we worked through this unit, I had a lot of mixed feelings about the resources that we had. And even though some of those resources that I probably would be skeptical about using again, they are still included in our lesson plans. And so I have notations on why they're still included, how to use them even though they contain incorrect information, and alternatives if you wish not to use them. Because we are secular homeschoolers, I wanted to use as many secular materials regarding this particular unit since it is mixed with a lot of religion. As I worked through the unit, I realized that a lot of those resources were poor resources compared to our non-secular resources that are available for a Muslim audience. And so I am sharing those with you today so that you can have those resources if you wish to include them in this Golden Age of Islam unit, which I also want to say is not a religious unit. The Golden Age of Islam is a history unit that looks at the time period of about 600 to about 1700s. You could even go all the way into the 20th century, and it's looking at the geographical areas from Spain and Morocco all the way through India, of course, across the North Africa, Arabian Peninsula, but all the way into India and China and Malaysia and Indonesia. All of that entire area is in some way covered in this unit. So it spans over 1,000 years of history and a great portion of the planet. Okay, so let me start with our lesson plans. These lesson plans are set up very similar to other lesson plans that I have created for our unit studies. You can find them all in my shop on my website at pepperandpine.com. Currently, you can just scroll down on the main page and you're going to find all of the products that I have. You can also go to the description box on this video and you can just tap on the link that will take you directly to the lesson plans for the Golden Age of Islam unit. Most of my lesson plans begin with a portion that explains how to use the lesson plans. and a little bit about how we actually structure our unit studies or our main lesson blocks, our school day, how we do our block rotations, and how the lesson plans are set up either in somewhat of a chronological order of what you can do at the beginning of your main lesson or the beginning of the day and then go throughout the day. It's somewhat set up that way for your ease, and it also is set up to include different grade levels, because when we put together our unit studies and main lesson blocks, they generally are suitable for multiple age groups, multiple grade levels, multiple abilities and interests. And so I have put on the side of the lesson plans a grade range in case you really have young children. For instance, if you really have young children and you don't have any high schoolers and junior high schoolers and you don't want to use some of the other more dense material, for instance, then you might stick more closely to the younger material focused for younger students and the picture books. That might be something that suits you better. And if you have a high school student, then you might gravitate towards some of the resources that I have suggested for a high school student. So that is part of what you can find in the lesson plans, and I explain that at the beginning of the lesson plans as well. Something else you're going to find in the lesson plans is you're going to find like a variety of things, but part of what we like to do with our unit studies and main lesson blocks is that we like to include a lot of hands-on projects. We like to head to the kitchen whenever possible. We like to do our handwork projects, and while they're not included here, we used to do a lot of practical activities, like maybe going to a museum or a field trip or living history event. We like to include those things as well. They're not included here for this particular main lesson block or unit study. However, I do encourage you, if you are not Muslim, to call your local mosque and see if you can get a tour of the mosque or some information, because that's a great living history or practical experience that you can have with your students. So while that's not included here in the lesson plan, because for us as a Muslim family, we don't need to schedule like a field trip to go do that because that's part of our daily life. I would encourage you that if you are doing this and you're curious about bringing some of those hands-on activities, lively experiences into your unit, that is something that you can do. So what you're going to find for this particular unit is a focus on math, geometry in particular. You could also include architecture in that, as well as other sciences and other math related subjects and projects. But I did include geometry quite heavily in this unit because it fit really well with the other material that we were studying about Islam, the spread of Islam, the art related to decorating different structures and buildings, the architecture. All of it worked really well together, and that is also a reflection of the Islamic ideals, that we are not going to have statues and we are not going to draw the human form, an animal form. There are opinions where Muslims are saying that's okay, but for the vast majority of Muslims, we're not going to be doing those kinds of things, and so we're going to be decorating our buildings in different ways. And so tile work and geometry were really big, and that's why we've included it in this main lesson block. And we've included biographies and picture books and assigned reading and read alouds. And of course, we have our weekly project and our weekly cooking project. And I've sourced a variety of recipes based on a few different cookbooks. And some of those resources were not available to me when I first put together this unit. So I want to share with you those things that came in later in the unit so that you can see those first off before I review our other material. Okay. So the way that we worked through our unit is that I scheduled this for 12 weeks. So it is a really long unit. And I would suggest that because this is so dense, that you spread this across, say, a year or 6 months rather than the 3 months that we scheduled it for. And because this came at the very end of all of our history units, we only had 6 weeks to cover this material. So we didn't get through everything. The other thing is that we have a number of assigned reading selections, and I have set them up according to grade level. This is just my personal assessment and opinion. This isn't literally 9th grade level or 10th grade level. I have included this as what I would do with my own children and students. So what I've done personally with my son, who is 14, so that would typically be 9th grade. He hasn't just read the 9th grade assignment. Actually, we began reading that aloud, but I didn't really care for this particular version of the seerah or the biography of the noble prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So what I did was I gave him the assigned reading for all of high school. So he had a lot of reading to do for the biographies as well as the history. Now, this is not typical. That would be far too much for any one student to cover within 12 weeks. But I do want to say that because we are just doing this right now, this lesson plan could span for several years by doing this at a slower pace and just choosing the materials that I have suggested and spread them out over 4 years, for instance, or you can pick and choose the resources that are going to interest you and your child and just do those ones. Okay, so I encourage you to check out the lesson plans as well as all the other projects that we've done for this unit, and I hope that you find something that works well for you and your students. So I want to begin by sharing with you 3 resources that you probably didn't see when I put together this unit, and that's because they are resources that are written by Muslims for a Muslim audience. But after going through a lot of the material, I think that these would actually be more suitable resources for a general audience, and so I encourage you to check them out. The first thing I want to share with you, and this is not something that I use this time around, is called What Islam is All About by Yahya Emmerich. And this is what you might typically find, like say in an Islamic school Islam class, and it's going to go through the basics of Islam, the history of Islam, the rules in Islam, a bit of the seerah, which is the biography, or I guess that's a poor comparison, but somewhat of the biography of the noble prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So it's going to cover just the general foundations for Islam, including the rules and the belief system and the general principles about the religion. And this is set up like a textbook. So you're going to see it like with your vocabulary words. It's set up kind of in the same way that you would typically find a history textbook. It's going to include some questions at the end of the chapters and potentially even some projects that you can do. So if you are more into a textbook approach, this I think would be a really valuable resource. If you are not into a textbook approach the way I am, I still found this to be a really valuable resource. And the way that I used it, and this has been years since I used it, I actually, we're a Muslim family, so we are living our Islam. But I got to a point where my kids were my oldest child was entering junior high, just the years before high school. And I used this book as a way to make sure that I did not leave any glaring gaps in his Islamic education. So we read this aloud. I would ask some of the questions at the back of the book. We would, go over the vocabulary. We'd go over the stories. And what I found was that thankfully through our other resources, their classes, are what we taught in our homeschool, what they got from going to the mosque or the masjid, their Islamic classes, that whole package meant that all of this that was included in here, I would say a good 80% was stuff that they already knew or were familiar with. And the things that maybe we could polish up on are sometimes the way that categories are set up within the religion, like say the 5 pillars or 6 principles of belief. Like sometimes we didn't use that terminology specifically, but we still knew those principles. And so going over this gave us the vocabulary, the terminology to relate to others, to explain to others, and just to make sure that we were well versed in our own foundations of our religion. So I would recommend this. Now, yes, there may be some issues with the content. It's been a long time since I've read through this. I'm not a scholar in Islam, so there may be things that I think are incorrect that are actually correct, and vice versa. I might find errors that are maybe accepted by some scholars and not by others. So the point is that I don't feel like you're going to find any perfect book. I think the motivation behind writing a book is really important, because there are a lot of texts out there that specifically are aimed at undermining the religion of Islam, and those ones I would caution you against. But in general, if you're finding a mistake in a book, then it's an opportunity for you to evaluate that, speak about that with your children, share your point of view on that information. There's a lot of differences even amongst Muslims. And so it's not a matter of, well, that's wrong, therefore we have to throw out the whole book. It's a matter of, let's talk about it, and let's talk about how our ideas are different from their ideas, and how we can still accept other people and their ideas. We may not accept other ideas. So this is one book that you did not find in how we put together this unit, and I'm finding it to be a really valuable resource. So our Golden Age of Islam unit happened to coordinate with Ramadan this year in 2021. I suddenly forgot the Islamic year. I think, are we in 1442? Anyway, our Islamic calendar is based on the Hijrah, which is the migration of the Prophet, peace be upon him, from Mecca to Medina. That is year 1. So that is how our calendar is set up. Our calendar is also lunar and not solar. And so we have approximately 355 days in a year. And we have the 12 months, but each month is either 29 or 30 days. And the new month, it begins with the sighting of the new moon. Our days begin at sunset. So the night before the day is the beginning. So for instance, when Ramadan started this year, Ramadan began the night before we began fasting our first day. And Ramadan ended with the sighting of the new moon. So that evening, we didn't have any of our traditional night prayers that are associated with Ramadan, because that night following that last day of fasting was the first night of Eid, which is the celebration that happens after Ramadan. Okay, so we do the lunar calendar. It begins at sunset, and our months begin with the sign of the new moon. They're 29 to 30 days. There are 12 months in a year, which means there are about 10 days fewer days in our year than there are in the conventional year, solar year, which means that every year, Ramadan, or any month for that matter, comes 10 days earlier, approximately. Okay, so our Islam unit coordinated with our Ramadan unit. Oops, I'm so sorry for that. The month of Ramadan. And during the month of Ramadan, we have our own traditions, just family traditions, and we cover the entire seerah. We used to cover the seerah once a year. The seerah is the biography, the events, the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Prophet Mohammed, peace be upon him. And so the word seerah is the word that Muslims use. It's an Arabic word. And so if I interchange that on occasion, I apologize. So we used to cover the biography once a year in our homeschool. We would use a text that was written for adults or college students, and I would read that aloud to my children, my students, for the entire year. We would just break up the book. It had, maybe 300 or 400 pages. We would read a few pages every day, and we would get through the biography that way. About 3 to 4 years ago, we switched that up, and we started doing the biography from a child level, and we would complete it in 1 month. And the biography that we're using now is this one by Lena, her name, the author, I believe this is the translator, Lena Kelani, I believe. I'm sorry, it's translated by Salwa Rawash. And we have really enjoyed this seerah, this biography. However, it is very pricey. I apologize. I wish I had a more affordable resource. I really like it. It's not perfect, but I really, really like it. It comes in a really beautiful hard container that keeps the books protected. and it comes with 20 volumes. The books themselves, the quality is really basic. It is staple bound. The paper and the printing are okay. They're not great. And because this is a translation, there happens to be a lot of grammatical errors and spelling errors. I've found at least one in every book, which doesn't concern me. The quality of the writing and the content I feel is really, really well done. I just want to point out that you are going to find some errors now and again. And that's fine. Also, the way that the Arabic has been translated into English for certain words and names, they are different than the traditional spellings that you might find in other resources. Again, not a big deal, but I do want to point that out. So this comes with 20 volumes. Each volume is 15 pages. They take about 20 to 30 minutes to read aloud. I like the size of the font. I would put this at maybe middle to upper elementary reading level and content. We do read these aloud, although now with my older, I'm only homeschooling 2 children, a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old. So my 14-year-old has been reading these on his own for the last 2 years. And then for my daughter, I still read these aloud. In the past, my children would do a written narration with an illustration to go along with each of these books. That didn't work out so well. They wouldn't complete the entire 20 volumes, which meant that sometimes they wouldn't finish reading it because they weren't done with their assignments. So we switched it up and now we do a video narration. And there are 20 volumes and there are 30 days, 29 to 30 days of Ramadan. So what we'll do is that on the first day, we'll read the book. My son was very regular with this. My daughter and I a little bit less so. So the first day we read the book. The following day we would do the video narration and read the second book. My son opted to read them and then do the video narration right away. I don't recommend that. I think it's much better to let the information settle for one day. This is more of a Waldorf principle that I really adhere to, or rather that I really I find to be of tremendous value, even though we may not do it all the time. So read the book or read aloud the book, and then the following day you can do the written narration, the oral narration, or the illustration. And then on the third day you can do whatever you missed. So for instance, if you're doing the written narration on day 2, the third day you can do your illustration, or you can swap them and do the other way around. Okay, so these books I feel are really well written and I really enjoyed them. They're very easy to get through in a month. Of course, you can spread this out over a longer period of time. They are pricey, coming in at over $100. And so if you have a different resource, then absolutely you may use that. But I found this to be a really complete overview at not just a child level, but also at an adult level. Just because you're an adult doesn't mean you always have to read books written for adults. I find books written for children, not the really super basic picture books that are intended for toddlers, but books that are written for children. I actually find them to be an amazing resource for all grades, all ages, because it reduces, it doesn't dumb down, but it reduces information very simply so you can get a great overview of a biography, a situation, a historical event before you dive deeper into the more nitty-gritty, the details, the people, the time period, the context. So I do really value books that are written at the elementary, junior high level. I think that they are wonderful resources and often overlooked and undervalued. The next 2 books that were late editions were The Companions of the Prophet Volume 1 and Volume 2. And again, these are books that we have used for so many years. They make up the content for our grammar and writing curriculum that I made for my own children. The writing is superb. It is so well done. The chapters are just the right length to give you a great overview of a companion of the Prophet, and I've really enjoyed these 2 books. They are a little bit on the older side in the sense that they may be more difficult to find. I don't know that there has been a reprinting of these books. I highly, highly recommend them for all audiences, not just for Muslims. I think that when anyone wants to learn about Islam, I think go into the resources that are intended for a Muslim audience. You're going to find the content that is high quality, in general, not always. And it's going to give you aspects of the religion or the behavior that you may not find in other resources. There are 2 volumes for these books, and each volume goes through 30 different companions. And there used to be an audio version for volume 1. I never found it for volume 2. We added these as biographies later on in the unit as part of the lesson plans. So if you really enjoy these, I would just recommend that you do them as biographies throughout the entire unit, not just towards the end. The reason why I added them later on in the unit for the junior high level is because this book and another book, I had it scheduled for 7 weeks at a very slow pace, doing 1 chapter a week. So not very much reading for the biographies at that level. And that was once these books ran out and my unit was longer, then I included these ones at a more aggressive pace. So let me put these ones aside and share with you, before I share with you some of these books or the books that are for the high school level, I actually want to share with you some of the resources that were not in the original video. The first book is called Feast, Food of the Islamic World, and this was one of a couple of books that I wanted to include in this unit. The other book, I have not even ordered it yet. It's called Sunnah Foods, and it is the foods that have been mentioned in the Quran or in the Hadith or by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that have either specific blessings or specific wisdoms behind them, or there is a health component to them or a healing aspect to them. So that's Sunnah Foods. That book you can find down in the description box below. It is linked, so you can still go and check it out, even though I can't show it to you here today. I did want to include that. Now, that is not a secular book. That is something that if you were interested in seeing what is significant for Muslims or why there is value in certain foods that are mentioned, then that would be something that you might want to look into. It's probably not a secular book, but I think there's value for everyone. So the book that is just breathtakingly beautiful is this one called Feast of the Islamic World by Anissa Hilu. And it is gorgeous. The photographs just make you want to try all of it. And it's packed. There are so many recipes, and they're wonderfully laid out. And something that's just kind of a joy for me is I love the details of books. I love the quality. I love the paper. I love the font when it's been thought about. I love those details. It brings the experience of reading a book or using a book from something that's just academic to something that's an experience, and that's something that really speaks to me. So things like even the little motifs around each of the recipes, the way that the font is written for the title, these are things that for sure mean nothing to the content, but for me they speak to the joy of having the book as a resource. So we, as always, the kids and I will go in and flag all the pages for the recipes that we want to do. These ones you will be able to find on the playlist for our Golden Age of Islam unit. You can find that playlist link down in the description box below, where you're going to find all of the projects, all of the recipes, all of the books and resources that we've used together in that playlist, which will continue to grow as we do things that coordinate with that particular unit. So this book was one where within the first 15 pages, my daughter had flagged every single recipe that had a photograph with it. So we have a lot of cooking to do, which of course our unit is unofficially done, but it doesn't mean that we won't still go through these recipes at another time in the school year, just because our unit is done. Okay, let's move on to another book that didn't come until much later. It was recommended to me after I had posted about this book called The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. I did not like this book at all. I had a lot of reservations about this book, and yet I still bought this one, and I want to explain why. So this is written at an adult level. I would put this at high school or college level if you have students. It is very dense. In my opinion, it's very biased, but I'm not a historian. I can't speak to the historical references, I am speaking simply to the, in my opinion, the fringe historical examples that were used that may be less agreed upon or less documented. That was my impression of it. Again, as a non-historian, as a student of history, these are my impressions. I absolutely did not care for the explanations of Islam, the road that included a lot of Islamic references. I've made notations on practically every page. I thought that it was not well done, not well written, not well represented, and contained a lot of fallacies. Those, again, are my opinions based on my knowledge and my experience actually being a Muslim and having studied our own history. Again, it doesn't mean that you throw out the whole book unless the book is specifically there to undermine not just Islam, but any religion or any culture, any country. If a book is specifically there to undermine or cause propaganda, then that is something that's extremely questionable, and I would not bother reading that unless it was for a very specific purpose of, academics and dissection. If it's a book that contains problems or fallacies or just wrong information, again, it's an opportunity for you to check that information, discuss it, look at other people's worldviews. So there is a difference in the purpose behind the book. And of course, you're not going to know the intention behind the author. So that being said, having not liked this book, I still got the child version of the book. This is the Silk Roads. It's an illustrated new history of the world, and it is so beautiful. I love the illustrations. I love the way that the book is laid out. I love the paper. It's such high quality paper. It's such a nice binding. Like, the whole presentation of the book is absolutely beautiful. I have not read this yet because this came very late in our unit, and so I cannot tell you about it at this point, but I did want to share it with you, and I do want to tell you that as we complete these resources, you'll be able to find one of two things: either a written review of these resources on the blog post that accompanies this video, that link is down in the description box below, or an updated review video for the materials that I'm not able to do a complete review of right now. Okay, so let's put these aside and dive into some of the other resources that I have. Now, because we did this unit that span from basically first grade or kindergarten level all through high school, there are some books that are assigned to my high schooler that we as a family did not read aloud, and my high schooler has not finished. So it's going to be hard for me to give you an accurate review of these because I haven't read them. I've only read one of these books that you see here. And so what I'm going to do is tell you about the one book that I did read. I will give you a brief review of this one and tell you what my son has to say about the beginnings of these books, and provide for you a review from his perspective, which will be a written review on the blog post. And then as I am able to go through these, then I can also give you my impression of these books. At this stage in our homeschool, it isn't possible for me to do all of these as read alouds within the 12 weeks, as well as do our other read alouds, which I will show you, because we our units are book heavy. And so we did read all of these books mostly, and so that took up a lot of our time. And so I can tell you about these ones, but I cannot tell you about all of these ones. Let's start with the first one, 1453. This contains history that it was towards the end of the time span of our unit. And this has to do with the fall of Constantinople and the shift of the Islamic capital to Istanbul. So it is like the Ottoman rule at that point. And I was very skeptical about this book because it was available at a bookseller that primarily has a lot of Christian content. So I was concerned about the bias in this book. And I actually found it to be very fair on both sides. I found it to be really insightful as to the historical situation at the time and how it got to that point, because it begins, this is a very dense book. It was not easy to get through. We really struggled to get through it. I read this aloud to my students, and at the time, my 9-year-old did not get a lot out of it. This was not intended for her. My 14-year-old, who was then 13, he really didn't enjoy listening to this book, but when we were done, we both felt so much more knowledgeable for this particular battle, and I really appreciate that about some books where it dives really, really deep about one not one little situation, one really big situation, but rather than just talk over the fall of Constantinople in a paragraph in another book, you have like an entire book that goes deep into this particular not just battle, but really transformative moment in history. What this did for us, because we went so deep into this point, my kids will forever know the date 1453. They will forever know what happened. They will forever have this anchor in history that they can then piece the history of the area and timeline around that one event. So while there may be things Islamically that are incorrect in this book that I don't know about, because there are things, okay, I take that back. Let me reframe that or rephrase that. I apologize. There are things in here that Muslims do that are not correct Islamically. Okay. So if you were looking at this to know what Islam says, what Muslims do is not what Islam says. And this is of, any religion. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is that, there are aspects of Islam that are correct that are mixed in with things that were not correct. So I understand as a non-Muslim, it would be very difficult to weed through what is Islamic and what is not. The other thing is that I found that the author was very, I was very critical when I was reading this book because of my thoughts on how it was going to be presented. So I really looked, are they favoring the Christians in Constantinople? Are they favoring the Christians? And I apologize, there are different parts of Christianity. So there are the Christians who were the part in Italy. So I believe that would be the Roman Catholics. I apologize. There are the Byzantine Christians. Again, I apologize for not using the correct terms. For Muslims, they're generally just referred to as Muslims. If they are referred to by location, it would be considering that they are either from that location or the capital of Islam is in that location. Okay, so I was looking at each chapter and wondering, is it favoring one side over the other? And really, I found that it wasn't. My impression, it wasn't. However, if you are going to be critical of things that are presented in here that are un-Islamic, but are done by Muslims, then you might get upset. Like, why is he mentioning this? That's not Islam, but the Muslims still did it. So historically, it's important that you still say the things that the Muslims did, even if it wasn't Islamic, because that's part of the history, if that makes sense. Okay. So I do recommend this book. However, I don't know enough about the fall of Constantinople. This is the only book that I've read on it. So it's possible that if I had done other resources, especially in either the Arabic language, the Turkish language, or Latin, if there were histories still written in Latin at that time, then you may have a different view of the fall of Constantinople. There may be wrong information in this book that, is corrected in other books. This is the only book that I've read on that. So if you have read multiple books on the fall of Constantinople, including this one, and you can say, oh, well, that actually didn't happen, here's another resource, please let me know. Okay. The following books, this book I think is at a high elementary or junior high level. That's where I put it in the lesson plans. My son read this book, and you can find his impressions of the books on the blog post that accompanies this video. I do like these books that are written for the junior high level as biographies. I find them to be just wonderful resources. This book, Sahidin, Hero of Islam, so Saladin, I think is how you would pronounce it. Sahidin is how we pronounce it as Muslims in Arabic. Anyway, this book was way more dense. There's this huge gap between, say, the junior high quality of books to the adult, high school, college, and adult quality. Not quality, I guess just the denseness of the book, the way that it's written, the way that it appears to be a little bit more dry, a bit more of a history versus a bit more of an engaging narrative. I enjoyed these books over these books, although these ones will probably contain more information. This was such a difficult read for my son compared to some of the more enjoyable narratives. He got to chapter 5. What I had asked him to do, since it wasn't going to be likely that he was going to read all of these books, I asked him to read this book in its entirety and to read about 3 to 4 chapters of the rest of these books. This one came in at an level so far. The Golden Age of Islam. This is another one that was really dense. Again, he got to he completed chapters 1 and 2. These are longer, more dense chapters, and it's going to cover more details about the Golden Age of Islam, the time period, and the locations versus some of the other books that I'll share with you that are intended for a younger audience. This book was highly recommended to me by a friend who read it, and her son read it, raved about it. And so without having completed this book, I only read maybe 2 chapters in this book. I would still recommend this book, but you'll be able to find more of my thoughts on it on the blog post. But because it was highly recommended to me by a trusted resource, I would like to pass on that recommendation by my friend. There are other books in this series. I don't know if they're the same author. However, you can find this book at Siraj Bookshop, and you can find that link down in the description box below. You can find actually the links to all of the books on the blog post. There are other biographies. I find this to be such the little that I read from it, a really important biography, because a lot of times we'll see the biographies of the companions from the time that they're Muslim, maybe a little bit before, but you're rarely seeing them from the time of their childhood and the culture at the time. And that really helps you understand the motivation for behaviors and the way they were raised. And then, of course, you have later on when they became Muslim, and then their behaviors after that, and the spread of Islam or other aspects of their life. The next book is called Pathfinders, The Golden Age of Arabic Science. This was something that if you're looking specifically at the science aspects of what was discovered or improved upon during the Golden Age of Islam, this might be something that you would enjoy. It does go through a little bit of the history prior to the expansion of Islam. It's a very specific book. It didn't find a good spot in our lessons. However, if you were doing this for adults or high school or college level, and you included some of those scientific aspects into your lessons, maybe you are recreating some of those experiments or demonstrations, then I think that this would be a valuable resource. We did not get through it, and so I can't tell you too much more about it other than the intention behind having this book. Lost Enlightenment. This ended up being another really dense book that in itself, this could be the content of an entire unit. My son got through 2 pages. So this is not, I won't be able to give you much of a review on this one just yet. Okay, let's put these books aside and share with you a few more actually, let me just share with you really quickly. This is a junior high book or upper elementary. We did not intend to read this unless we had a ton of time left over. It doesn't look like something that's going to have a lot of correct Islamic teachings, and so I didn't want to include it, but because this is available to the general audience, I did want to read it to give you a review and a reflection on from an Islamic perspective or a Muslim perspective, but we haven't. It's called The Bedouin's Gazelle. Bound by tradition, torn by love. We're not really into those kinds of stories anyway, and so with our limited amount of time and all of the books that we want to read, this wasn't something that I was going to set aside specific time for. I do want to read it and give you a review about it because it is a concern if you are not Muslim and these are the resources available to you. It's important to have maybe a balanced view of it from the Islamic perspective. Okay, let's put these books aside and look at the geometry resources that we had for this unit. The geometry resources that I have here, and I do have a lot more geometry resources. Again, you can check out our entire geometry playlist and blog post. Those links are down in the description box below. Within these lesson plans, I did include a lot of the geometry that we've done in our geometry lessons. And so even without those books, you can still do those projects. They are 3-fold to 12-fold symmetry projects. This is going to work on the basics of fold symmetry to look at designs, tile designs, architectural designs. So I have 4 resources here. This first resource is called Islamic Design, a Genius for Geometry. Now, amongst all of these resources, you're going to have a lot of overlap, but they are, in my opinion, for different purposes and for different grade levels. This is one that I intended to read aloud to my children, just, a few pages every week to span the 12 weeks, just to get a general overview of Islamic architecture and the role geometry plays in those tile designs and in art and decoration. So this would be a great, just read aloud, just to get a general idea of that. If you want to take it up a notch, I have more resources. The next book is called Islamic Geometric Design. This is going to go into way more, in my opinion, way more detail. It has a lot more illustrations and photographs, and it's going to give you a lot of examples of how these geometric designs were included in these architectural buildings and the mosques or masajid of the land, and how it differs from region to region. There may be some subtle, well, actually I say subtle because I'm not so well versed in the different geometric patterns, but there could be actually a lot of variation depending on what part of the world you're looking at, because again, Islam was from Spain and Morocco all the way to Indonesia and Malaysia, and so you're going to have those designs that were already, the art that was already prevalent in those areas, they're going to be reflected in the designs of the buildings, in addition to some of the things that were popular at the time or that spread because of Islam. Like, you're not going to have, say, figures and people and those kinds of things. And so there are going to be some similarities, but then there are also going to be some uniquenesses depending on where in the world you're going to find these different architectural features. Okay, so this is going to take you into a lot more detail. You can see that the photographs are stunning, and I love having that included, not just the illustrations, but the photographs as well for a book like this. I put this at high school level. Anything that is for adults, I put at a high school level. It could be college level, but of course I'm not teaching college level because we are homeschoolers. So I put this at high school level. I put this at high school, elementary, and even high school, junior high, and upper elementary. Okay. If you want to work through the designs, in addition to doing your fold symmetry, which I would say works for students about grade 4 through grade 8, you can find those tutorials on my website. If you want to work from those fold symmetries into more intricate designs, I've got 2 books here for you. The first book is called Islamic Design Workbook, and what this provides are a bunch of worksheets that already have the designs on for you. You can just use them as is, or you can photocopy them just for personal use. I believe you can. You cannot photocopy them and distribute them. That would be a copyright violation, but you can look into the details of how you can reproduce these for yourself. And what this is not how the design was done. The design was literally done through working through these geometric figures. So this is like a cheat sheet. So it's not authentic in that respect, but it's going to give you the designs that were represented in certain structures, in a mosque in a particular area, or in a tomb, or in a building in these different areas. Okay, that's not going in, so I'm going to just take that out for a moment and show you the book. So the book itself is done in really simple colors. Not my favorite, but that's okay. It's here to show you the different designs. So each of these designs includes a blank worksheet for you. It includes the name of the structure or the mosque or the tomb, and then you can just go through it. It does include an introduction. I do highly recommend that you start with the introduction so you can get an idea of the history behind these things, and then you can see that it will tell you the name. The name is down here. It tells you what structure this is. And then you can see that you can then begin to color this in whatever design you want. But of course, here it shows you the tile work or the painting or the design that was actually used. And you can see the basics of how it was. Looks very like, how do you even do that? Wow, that's really intense. That is really neat. So depending on which parts you color in, we've only done the basics with fold symmetry. So this is something that I'm really excited to include. And you can see that we have not included that when our unit ended up being shorter than the time that we had scheduled for it. The things that we did not have time for were the geometry, which I am so sad to have left out, but we had done a geometry unit earlier on in the school year, and we will be doing another one. And so we will, though our unit is unofficially done, we will still continue to do these. This I would put at elementary and junior high level. You can certainly do this with high school level, but the reason why I wouldn't recommend this with the high school level is because I would recommend this book instead, Islamic Geometric Patterns. So this one is the workbook, but this one actually tells you how to construct these different tile designs and geometric designs based on the actual geometry. So this one doesn't come with workbook pages. This one comes with the instructions. So you will need a compass and a ruler and pencil, of course. I think those are the tools that you'll need in order for you to construct these different designs. Okay, so there was a heavy math aspect to this unit. So let's dive into the other books that we actually got through a lot more of for this unit, and the ones that are for younger students. I started out with like the content for the high school and upper elementary and junior high. So let's move into some of the other content. But I have one more book to share with you. This is the biography, Mohammed, His Life, based on the earliest sources by Martin Lings. Now, this book was highly recommended to me by a friend, and this is a great resource for all audiences, but I actually didn't like it, and we didn't get far into it before I was just like, I don't want to read this one. However, it is highly recommended, so if you are looking for a secular resource on the biography, this might be a suitable resource. I personally didn't like it. The book that I would recommend for Muslims in particular, but for a general audience, I really don't think there needs to be a separation between who the books are written for. It's just a matter of understanding the Arabic notations that will be included with some of the words or the situations. You are going to find Quran in Arabic. You're going to find the translation almost in any book that's written in English. You are also going to find certain Arabic words coming after people's names. That's what makes it, for a Muslim audience. Outside of those things, I find this to be a far superior resource. There are a couple of things I don't agree with in this book. However, this is an amazing resource. This is my favorite seerah book. This is called The Sealed Nectar. And this was our first book that we used as our seerah book, our biography book. After that, I just went through our own library and started pulling other biographies, the seerah books, so that every year we could do from a different author, and none of them compared to this one. And we've done so many over the years, and this has been the best. And this is my latest addition to our seerah books, and we did not finish it, and I am not sure that I want to finish it so that I can provide like a balanced review between the two books, or if I don't want to waste my time and I just want to go back to one that I know I really enjoyed and loved and found really valuable, I do want to offer both of them to you. This is one that you'll find in the How We Put Together This Unit. This one you won't, and I do highly recommend this one. So I did want to share it with you now. Okay, so we had a couple of read-alouds. Actually, we had a lot of read-alouds, but this one was one where I didn't expect any work to be produced for it. So when we're putting together our main lesson blocks and unit studies, it'll include activities that we're doing for our opening activities, which I will share with you. It includes some picture books. It includes like some resources, and it includes some read-alouds, and on occasion some assigned reading. And this particular unit had a lot of assigned reading. And when it comes to read-alouds like this book, I am just reading that aloud to the children. I am not expecting any work to be produced. When it is my other lesson content, the work that I'm expecting to be produced by the children would be an illustration, it would be written content, it would be a hands-on project, dictation, or narration, but I'm expecting something to be produced with the lessons. This book, we didn't have anything. Now, when I first learned about this book, I was very skeptical about it. I did not buy it initially. I did not want what I thought was a historical fiction for our biographies. I was very worried about how it was going to be presented, how it was going to be embellished. I was so wrong. This was such an excellent book, amazingly written. It is a page turner. We loved it, and we cannot wait for the author to produce more books. It was so well done. It took you through, so Khadija, mother of history's greatest nation, I apologize, forgot to tell you the title of the book. This is the wife of the Prophet Mohammed, peace and blessings be upon him. And she passed away, within, oh gosh, I actually can't remember how many years, within 10 years of the Prophet becoming a prophet. So it's not going to take you through the entire biography of the Prophet, and it's not going to take you through the entire seerah. It's going to take you through her life, and in a sense, but not exactly, a little bit of her perspective on it, or not her perspective, rather, it takes you, it looks at the situations through her lens in a way. And I loved it. I loved it also because I need more female biographies, more female resources for our units. And my daughter loved this. We would have read the entire book in one day. It was that good. And the chapters are really short. The font is nice and big. It is intended for elementary. This is elementary reading level. And I cannot tell you, I mean, I only have good things to tell you about this book, and I do highly recommend it. So if you have a chance to include it, please do so. The next set of books I want to share with you, actually, I apologize. This Ibn Sina book was supposed to be with the junior high books that I initially shared with you, especially the one on Sahidin. This one is questionable in the sense that you may not agree with some of the ideas of Ibn Sina. If you are looking at it from a biography perspective and not from an Islamic perspective, I think there is a lot of value in that. I did really enjoy this book. I do not know enough about Ibn Sina's life to know whether his ideas were contradictory to Islam on a deep level or whether he was still considered Muslim. Like, I don't know those details, to be honest. However, as a book, I found it to be a really valuable resource because it didn't just talk about his life. It also talked about the Islamic society at the time, and sometimes we look back and we glorify a period in time or a historical situation, and yet while it functions really amazingly and while on the whole it is very wholesome and good and follows the Islamic principles and traditions, there may be situations or there may be rulers who are not always behaving Islamically because people are not perfect. So seeing it from that perspective, seeing some of the challenges or, wars, battles, conflicts within the Islamic empire at the time, I found that to be of value for me personally. So, I do currently recommend this book. However, I don't know enough about Ibn Sina, his life, his ideas to say whether this is a good biography to dive into. So I super apologize about that, but I did enjoy this book. Okay, so on to these books. This is the series called Age of Bliss. It's going to go through both the Prophet, peace be upon him, as well as one of his children, his grandchildren, his nephews, and then a lot of the companions. I forgot this one here. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 of them. I have 10 in the series. I do not know how many are in the series. I don't know whether they are still being added to as a series. Currently, I have 10 of them. These ones were gifted to me for free from the bookstore called Siraj Bookstore.co. You can find links to whatever books are still available. I apologize. Some of them are sold out. So you can find them there, as well as so many other resources. It is such a valuable resource for books and other materials. So I do highly recommend that you check them out. So we did not get through all 10 books. We read 3 out of the 10 books, and I want to share with you my thoughts on them. To begin with, these are very fast reads. They're very short. The chapters are generally really short. And it is written at an elementary level. We do these as read-alouds. However, this series is written by a number of different authors. So let me just put them into the different categories really quickly so that you can get an idea. Okay. All right. So the ones that we read, oh my goodness. We read, I think we read Ali, Ibn Abi Talib, and Fatima. Gosh, I have to ask my kids. I know we read Fatima, so let me just go with the 2. Oh, look at me. I did write on the back of them so that I would have, this is what I typically do, in part because sometimes my memory fails me after we've read so many books. I generally write on the little post-its that I use in order to do our lesson planning. I'll also write how we enjoyed the book. That way, when I am talking to you at this point, I can be more accurate because my thoughts and reflections on the books I generally write them right after I've read them. Otherwise, over time, I may forget some of the details. So the thing is that, I think it was Aisha that we read. I think it was these 2 that we read. Okay. We did not like these 2 books, and we really liked this one. Okay. And I think it has to do with the authors in this series. So while the whole series has a particular flavor, each book is going to be a reflection of the author's approach to that to the book. The way these books are set up, at least for the Fatima book that we read, it seemed like the book was a collection of situations. There didn't seem to be much of a link between one story and the next, between one chapter and the next. Each chapter is its own little individual story. It does go in chronological order, I believe, but the scenarios seem to be a collection of different hadith that are used in order to produce the content without there really being a narrative for the whole story. So my daughter and I really didn't like this book at all. Some of the stories I also felt were a little bit a harsh reflection rather than the more gentle reflections that we tend to see with them. I didn't really care for it. And I believe we felt the same way about this one, but less so than the book on Fatima. When we got to the book on Uthman, we loved it compared to these ones. It probably, could use a little bit more connection between the chapters, but this one was really well done, especially the last several chapters. You could tell that they were a collection of events that happened together. It really took you through the story. You felt very connected. You felt very engaged and invested in the story by the end of the book. It took you through, it kind of built you up and made that connection, and then, it's a sad ending. I'll just tell you now, spoiler alert. It's a very sad ending. And so it takes you through that journey in a much more cohesive way than the book on Aisha. The book on Fatima. Because this book we read it early on in the unit, and because we just really didn't connect with it, it prolonged us reading the other books, and we kept delaying. So out of the 10 books, we read 3. So to find a complete review on all the other books that we read, you can find it on the blog post that accompanies this video. But we thought that we would continue reading the other books written by the same author that we really liked the Uthman book from, and then we think that maybe it has to do with the author itself, the ones that we prefer over other ones. The next book I want to share with you is called Ibn Al-Haitham. This is National Geographic Kids. This is level 3 reading. I don't like the books that are level 1, 2, 3, and maybe there are other levels as well. I don't like the way that they are set up because I prefer reading, like, for instance, if this is level 3 and it's intended for a 3rd grader, I'm not sure if that's the way the reading levels are set up. So that would be about an 8, 9-year-old child. I would prefer to read content that was written at a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade level and read it aloud to my 3rd grader, because I feel like the content and the writing and the vocabulary are going to be better than what is written for a grade 3 student who can understand things at a higher level, even if they are not capable of reading and comprehending what they read at their grade level. So I didn't care for the writing quite as much. However, I still found it very informative. I did like this book a lot. I appreciate the illustrations. I appreciate the whole arc of the story. However, this wasn't the only book that we read on Ibn Al-Haitham. There were other books that we read, and what ends up happening with my daughter in particular is that the first book that we read on a particular person or historical situation sets the bar for everything that we read after it. So if we read another book and it doesn't go through the same highlights, or doesn't talk about the same situation, or it diminishes a certain situation and highlights another situation, my daughter will call out that other book. And because her first book that she read sets the bar, sets the standard. And so because this wasn't the first book we read on Ibn al-Haytham, she was like, oh, but that didn't happen, or this happened differently, or, even little terms, like he wasn't asked what he wanted, he was offered something, or rather he didn't ask to have access to the library, he was offered, little things like that she picks up on, and which is great because it means that she really was paying attention the first time and the second time, but it sometimes means that she's going to be more critical of the second book that she reads, or not like it as much because of the first book that she read. Overall, I still recommend this book. I just wish it was written at a higher, a higher level, just because of the way that we homeschool. Okay, let's pull out, our stack of read alouds. These make up both the picture book content as well as the lesson content for this unit based on grades 1 through about junior high, grade 6, 7, and 8. So that's still a really wide grade range. However, I do believe that putting students together from grades 1 through 8 in some cases works really well for some units, not for everything. But when we are reading content for, say, a 5th grader, 6th grader, 7th grader, they're still going to enjoy the picture books because the picture books are not toddler books. They're really high quality information that include illustrations, and I find them to be really valuable for all the way through 8th grade. And that's why I like to put these things together for a wide range of grades, because if you're just teaching an 8th grader, they are probably not going to enjoy reading a picture book. But if you're teaching a 1st grader, a 5th grader, and an 8th grader together, then collecting all these resources so that everyone benefits is going to be really valuable. So the first thing I want to share with you is something that we actually didn't use for this unit, but in retrospect, I'm realizing that some of the content that is specifically for a Muslim audience happens to work really well for all audiences. And this is Al-Khilafa Al-Rashida. And this is a textbook that you would find in an Islamic school. And if you are into using textbooks and workbooks, then I would recommend looking into these things. I can't speak to the quality and the content, but I wanted to offer it as a resource in case this is something that would work well for you, your students, maybe your co-op or your classes, as an alternative to some of the secular materials that I have, which were in some cases questionable and I didn't enjoy them quite as much. So I wanted to offer that. The next book that I want to share with you that we actually didn't get through is called The Last Will. This is a historic graphic novel. This one I believe was also from Siraj Bookstore. This was offered, actually I asked for it. A lot of books were given to me for free from that bookstore because we weren't able to use our secular educational funding for those books because they are for a Muslim audience. And so they did provide those books for free, and in some cases, you can say, absolutely just for a Muslim audience, but in most cases, they're really for all audiences. My children are really not into graphic novels, but I do want to offer this as an alternative in case your children are really into graphic novels. They may enjoy a book written this way. As a family, we just aren't, and I find them challenging to read personally because it's hard to know how to read them for me personally. And so I just kind of I just don't engage with them too much. Okay. Here's another book on Ibn Sina. This is called Step Into Reading, Meet the Luminaries. This is by AdabKids. And there are maybe more than 4. There may be actually more books in this series. We loved this series so much. I highly recommend it, and I am super surprised at myself because these are totally not the kind of books that I would go for rather. I don't care for the illustrations that much. I don't care for the way that it's written. I don't even care for the quality of the book, like the physical book itself. However, these were amazing resources. They are really quick reads. They take you through a whole arc of a person's life, the highlights, the challenges, the conflicts, the resolutions in a very simple way that both young students as well as adults can understand and relate to and connect with. And I just really, really enjoy them. And I kind of am surprised because, again, they're not the kind of books that I would go for. I don't really care for the books that are written at the reading level of a young child. I don't find usually the content to be as valuable as content that's written for an older student that can be read aloud to a younger student or a younger child. So I did really, really enjoy these, and I do highly recommend them. There are more in the series. I will get through them. They are hidden amongst all of these books. Another one that you did not see when I was putting together this unit is the Tell Me About series of books. And there are Tell Me About Musa, Tell Me About Yusuf, Tell Me About Mohammed. There are the greatest stories of the Quran and a few others in the series. I really, really love these stories. They are by Good Works Publishing, and they're by Sinha Snain Khan. I know that I've pronounced that name wrong, and I super apologize about that. I really, really like these books. If you can get your hands on them, I highly recommend them. They are wonderfully written. They're beautiful narrative, engaging. The illustrations are gorgeous. And what I like about them is that it also includes some additional information in these little captions here that complement the story. You do not need to read them. I think just reading the story itself is enough. But if you need some more information or historical context or something about the environment or the geography, then these little captions are going to give that to you within the story. I usually will read the entire thing and then I'll go and almost even change my voice to read this little caption here in a little bit more of a quicker manner. But the story itself is really beautifully done. I love the illustrations, and these books have been the content for our lessons as well as inspiration for our main lesson books. So if you can get your hands on these, I highly recommend them. We included a lot of picture books for this series or for this unit. Some of them were included in how we put together this unit. Some of them were not. As I went through and created the lesson plans for this unit, I included books that I did not have in how we put together this unit because I felt that they would be nice picture books as an introduction or a part of the opening activities to the lessons. So the first book I want to share with you is called Yatha and Fatima, Shalom and Salaam. And this is a story that's been updated or changed or a version of a book that is both, or a tale that is both a Hebrew and Arabic tale. It is told by originally it's two brothers, and in this situation it's two women. It is so beautifully done. It is one of my favorite picture books. It is very balanced. It shows the friendship and the companionship and the love between a Jewish woman and a Muslim woman, and it exposes aspects of their religions, their behaviors, their traditions, the things that they do within each religion, and of course their love and care for one another as neighbors. And so I really, really enjoyed this book. It's a book that we can read over and over and over again and never get tired of. I don't particularly like reading picture books over and over again, and this is one that I would just read every day because I love it so much. The Grand Mosque of Paris, the story of how Muslims rescued Jews during the Holocaust. This was something that I actually did not know about historically. I was born in France, lived there for almost 8 years. We've actually visited this mosque, and knowing a bit of this history was so profound for me. It is really beautifully done. I have my friend Megan to thank for this book because she's the one that gifted it to me several years ago. And while we have read it, now it has been included in our lessons, which has more significance for our main lesson blocks. So it is beautifully illustrated. It is beautifully written. It is historical. It gives you an idea of what was happening at the time. And it brings like a little sliver of a story. It's not all the history of what was going on at the time. It is a very specific story that is included in this larger history that you can really connect with. And what's really amazing is that these structures still exist today. We live in Southern California where everything is pretty much brand new. And so to be in a place where buildings are older and those buildings have gone through history, through people have lived and died, and new generations have come and gone, provides for me both a curiosity and intrigue and a lesson. And we don't have a lot of that here in Southern California. We do a little bit, but not much. We're, newer versus some of these cities and these countries that have been around for so many more hundreds of years, thousands of years, generations. Okay, so I do highly, highly recommend this book. It also, aside from the historical aspect of it, you're going to see a lot of architecture and tile work that, of course, would coordinate with the geometry aspects of this unit, but primarily I've included this as a picture book as part of the opening activities. It doesn't fit the time period at all. We are not going into the 20th century at all with this unit, and so I did not include it in how we put together this unit, but I think that it is an extremely valuable resource to include as part of your opening activities. This set of books here, you'll find more details about them for our Ibn Batuta unit, our West Africa unit. I did pull from those resources and those picture books to include in this unit because, again, for our opening activities, because these books were really great resources, because the illustrations are fabulous, and so we did include them. So Traveling Man, this is the journey of Ibn Batuta from 1325 to 1354. Really love the illustrations in this book. Mansa Musa, this is another book that is included as part of our opening activities. This also spans the 1300s as well. This is for West Africa and the Empire of Mali and the same region generally as Songhai and Ghana, I believe. Yeah, so it spans actually from, I think, the 900s to the 1400s. I apologize if that is inaccurate, but we've also used this book for our West Africa unit, and we included it as a picture book option for this unit as well. The Hungry Coat, this is going to be a picture book that is of the region around Turkey, and I cannot remember off the top of my head the time period, but I want to say possibly the 15 or 1600s, but let me double check that for you really quickly because I think it says it somewhere in the book, and now I can't seem to find it, so I apologize. 1200s. I wrote it down on the back of the book, the 1200s. We really enjoyed this book. We really enjoy a lot of the books by Demi. I find her illustrations to be unique, maybe not my favorite, but they've come to become iconic for these books. And I love like the gold foiling that is included in a lot of the illustrations. This is a shorter picture book compared to some of the other ones that she has that appear to be more lengthy, but all of her picture books are more lengthy compared to the picture books that you might expect for like really young children. So I find these picture books to be informative, to be contain more content than other books. And I love her biographies. So far, I've really enjoyed all of the books and however many we can get our hands on in her series. Okay, so this will be Turkey area, 1200s and beyond, and these are lessons from this particular man or scholar, and so again, we enjoyed it as part of our opening activities. Another book by Demi is called Mohammed, and initially I did not want to buy this book. I was very hesitant about including it. I was very averse to the idea of any of these illustrations for these historical situations that we do not illustrate. And so that was something that was a huge, huge turnoff for the book. The content of the book is amazing. The writing is great. The information, there may be like really minor errors, but overall I found it to be very accurate. The illustrations I do have a problem with. Nearly all of the illustrations I take issue with. However, obviously like the Kaaba is okay. If it's just random camels and, an Arabian landscape is okay. I would prefer just to cover all of the illustrations and just read the content. I do take issue with the illustrations. I don't think it's okay. However, I do believe that notation is made on why the illustrations were included, how they were drawn in order to adhere to some of like the Islamic principles and honor the fact that we don't illustrate some of these things. However, overall, I would have just done more geometric illustrations or landscape illustrations. I would not have done those things. Even with just a silhouette, I would not personally agree with that, and I did not want to have that for my children. And so a lot of times when we read the picture books, funny enough, my children are doing other things while I'm reading aloud. They are not always sitting right next to me looking at the illustrations. But if I were to include this where children are looking at the illustrations, I would just cover the parts that I disagree with. So overall, like if you want to use this, I would just use it with the caveat that we don't illustrate these things, but the content I found to be pretty accurate and well written. So we're not in any particular order at this point, so let's just go through these books and let me tell you why we have them, how we use them, and some other books that you can actually include. We had 2 books on the mosque, masjid in Arabic, and there is actually a third that I have included in the lesson plans, but I did not yet receive. It is called Mosque by, I think, David Macaulay. I might have the author might be pronounced differently or a different author's name, but he's written a lot of books. You can find them. He's done cathedral, he's done pyramids, he does them like in a pencil drawing. So anyway, there is one more book that I have included that I want to read that I haven't yet read. So I have a whole section in our lesson plans that includes aspects of the mosque or the masjid in Arabic, that either the construction, the use, historical mosques. And so I'm going to share with you 2 of the books, but know that there is a third that I would recommend be included. This one is called 16th Century Mosque, and this one focuses primarily on the construction of a mosque in Istanbul. But my daughter loved this book because it also goes in, well, some of the stuff is redundant for us as a Muslim, and so we sometimes, when we're talking about, say, the prayer, which we do 5 times a day, and the movements, and it seems redundant to actually talk about them since we experience them and we know them. But for someone who isn't, then I think starting with these aspects is going to really help us understand what our house of worship is about. And it's not just for prayer. It actually includes a lot of other things. So my daughter really enjoyed the human aspect of this book because it goes into the people, some of the original construction of the open air mosque, and then what it was used for, not really the history of the mosque, but maybe different styles and structures and what you can expect universally in a mosque, some of the decorations, the tile work, and then it goes into the building of the mosque and what aspects you're going to find in there, especially for ones that were built, or a particular one that was built in Turkey, modern day Turkey, in Istanbul. Overall, I really, really enjoyed it. Now, this is a bit, this goes in through like the 1500s, so it's towards the end of the time span that we are covering, but I still found it to be really valuable, and my daughter loved it. However, she did not love as much the Mosque of Cordoba told to children. So I thought, well, this will be a perfect accompaniment to, looking at the mosque. And she didn't like it as much, which was really too bad. And she didn't really like the way that it was written, in the sense that it's a few children, modern day children, going through this old renovation, this old mosque that's being renovated. And you're talking to the archaeologists. They're telling you about how they are unearthing aspects or parts of the mosque, how they're preserving it, why it was built, how it was transformed. So I thought it was really well done. My daughter didn't really care for it, but I would still recommend it and include it. It also talks a little bit about the Muslim influence in Spain, and then I don't know if it talks about when they left, but anyway, I still really enjoyed it. My daughter, not so much. And then, of course, there's that third book called Mosque. Okay, we have another book by about Ibn Sinha. This is The Amazing Discoveries of Ibn Sinha, and this book is written by Fatima Shafruddin. She also wrote the book on Ibn Batuta, and I believe, and it's illustrated by the same illustrator. And so you're going to find kind of a similar style, similar writing style. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate these picture books. I hope she writes a whole lot more of them on different biographies or different historical situations. I found it to be really informative. I really, really like the illustrations. I think it's a great addition to this unit, or just to a unit on biographies or this time period, or on scientists. Like you could fit it into a lot of different units, and I loved including it in this unit. So I do recommend that book. The Amazing Travels of Ibn Batuta, again by the same author and illustrator. It's again going to give you a nice overview of Ibn Batuta's life, I like the illustrations. I like picture books like this to give you just a general view of a historical situation or a biography before you dive in deeper, kind of give you some nice anchors as you move forward and learn more. And so I do appreciate this book. I do like the illustrations. I love hardback picture books. I like the whole presentation. It's really, again, an experience, not just, a reading. Okay, science, medicine, and math in early Islamic world. So we found this to be a bit of a dry, boring book. Now, this is written way more like a typical academic nonfiction book that you're going to find for elementary and junior high. It is, in my opinion, a forgettable book because it's not a narrative. It's not going to take you through from start to finish. There isn't one aspect of the book that you're connected to so that you remember the rest of the book. It's nicely laid out. It does have quite a few illustrations. I think it also includes some photographs as well. I found it to be a resource for me as a teacher that I can then dive into and maybe find biographies, historical situations, other resources. As a book, it's a valuable resource by itself, but as a read aloud, as a resource for children, I did not find it to be that great. And I'm saying that because my daughter didn't enjoy it and my son didn't really get much out of it. And so for those reasons, you might find it to be really great, but my children didn't. And I found it to be very forgettable. Like as I read through this, I very quickly forgot. Like it didn't stick with us. I don't find a lot of secular books on Islam for middle school that I find valuable. So I shouldn't say that I find valuable. I don't find a lot of them. So when I do find them, I do collect them. I do keep them for our units. I do want to read them. I feel in the English language, I feel that there are not enough resources for me to be picky about them when it comes to these kinds of nonfiction books. I'm finding there are more books now available for a Muslim audience and a secular audience on different biographies. We can start to become more choosy about how it's written, about the illustrations. But for some of these nonfiction books, I'm finding that I am just taking whatever is available and using it, even if it's not the best. Okay, so here are some more of those books. The Step Into Reading series by AdabKids. We loved all, like everyone in this series we loved. This is Imam Abu Hanifa, a debate. I really liked it. I thought it was really well done. My daughter liked it. Still can't say I love the illustrations, but overall, I do highly recommend this book series. So Ibn Haytham, Book of Optics. This is the first book that we read on Ibn Haytham, and so it really set the standard for my daughter. So when we read the other books on Ibn Haytham, she was always comparing it to this one. Again, we really enjoyed this book as well. There is another one that I will find as we get through. Actually, let me just show it to you right now. I just spotted it. This is Nizamuddin Ulayya. I probably pronounced that wrong. I apologize. And I didn't really care for this one as much. I just didn't care for the story as much, but it ended up being one of my daughter's favorite out of the 4 that we read. And so again, what you might like as a teacher, as a parent, might be different than what your children might like. But overall, I do recommend this series. We did really enjoy them, and my daughter really enjoyed them. And that's when we both enjoy a resource, then it's golden for me. Daily Life in the Islamic Golden Age. I do not recommend this book. It has a lot of fallacies, a lot of biases, illustrations that I found just unacceptable to be included. I want to point out one thing, because it's a very easy thing to point out as a fallacy, whereas other information is more subtle, and you can play devil's advocate and go, oh, well, the author might not have meant this, or whatever. I'm going to point out something that's just really noticeably wrong and so damaging to include, because it mixes truth with an opinion and a fallacy, and it imparts something that's very damaging to a general audience and even to Muslims in particular. So there's this section on marriage and divorce. I'm going to read to you this paragraph. The Islamic religion allows a husband to have up to 4 wives at a time. However, he was expected to support each wife equally. Those 2 sentences are correct. That usually meant that he had to maintain a separate household for each. Also correct. Which few could afford to do? That is subjective. As a result, most men only had 1 wife. Extremely incorrect. It set up the reason behind having 4 wives correctly, and it gave the reasons why they don't as a reason because you have to maintain equal households for them, and that is expensive. Therefore, because they don't have the money, they will only have 1 wife. 100% wrong, 100% of a fallacy, and in my opinion, that is intentional to, in my opinion, I could be wrong, of course, that is a very damaging point to make. Islamically, it says take 2, 3, or 4, but 1 is the best. Okay? That is the Islamic principle. Take 2, 3, or 4, but 1 is the best. And yes, you have to treat them equally. Okay, that's so challenging to do. Like it is a sin not to treat them equally. Therefore, you have to engage in this with such care. So the reason why you wouldn't take take 2, 3, or 4 wives is not because you can't afford to, but because 1 is the best. That's sufficient. You might say, well, I can't afford to have 2 wives. Okay, that's fine too. But the reason why you may have 1 wife is not because you can't afford to have 2 or 3 or 4 wives. It's because Islamically 1 is the best. So you may disagree with the motivation behind the way this is written. You may disagree that this is written incorrectly. For me, this is written incorrectly. Not only is it written incorrectly, it distorts what Islam actually says about this aspect of marriage and later on divorce. So as I read through this, I didn't mark every page that had something wrong. I started just to kind of collect those ideas in my head. I did flag some pages. I didn't have a pen handy, but when I do have a pen handy, I just start crossing out things and writing my own notes. I am not a historian. I am not an Islamic scholar. I am a Muslim. I am a student. And when I see glaring fallacies and incorrect information, then it causes me a moment to pause and reflect on the book. I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and she said something that I thought was really profound that I want to share with you. She said, "Who wrote the book?" I said, "Well, this is, a professor, he had a consultation with a professor of like Islamic history or Islamic studies, or, she said, is he a master of the Arabic language? And did he look at the content in the original form in the Arabic language?" My guess is no. I don't know, but my guess is no. Therefore, this is secondary information. He's not qualified in a sense, or if it was a female, she would not be qualified if she didn't go to the original sources, not just the original sources, but be a master in the language of the original source. I really appreciated that because, again, we have limited resources and sometimes we'll just take whatever is available without being choosy. I don't recommend this book, and I may be able to share more details of the things that are wrong about it. Again, when I do have my pen, I will literally mark in the books things that are incorrect. I will try to include as much as I am capable of including on the review on the blog post, but I do invite you to participate in your opinions, your reviews of this information as well. Your Guide to the Islamic Golden Age. I actually, enjoyed this book a lot more, surprisingly. I didn't like the way that it was written as much, only because I don't like books that have a lot of different captions and sections and parts where it's like hard to kind of read through and you're like, what part do I read first? That's just me personally. A lot of people do like this format because you can just have little easily digestible bits of information. For me, it's a little bit more challenging. This book, I didn't find any glaring mistakes. I found it to be informative. I found it just to be kind of neutral. I can't say that I highly recommend it or don't recommend it. It just kind of basic. What was nice about this book and other nonfiction books is that you're going to get a nice overview, which then can, if you're particularly interested in an aspect of what you're reading, like Islamic medicine, which that's a fallacy. It's not Islamic medicine. It's medicine during the golden age of Islam, or medicine that Muslims practiced, but it's not Islamic medicine, and it's not Islamic learning. That's not the case. But if there are, like, say, biographies that you're interested in, or, geography, or a particular battle, or something in medicine, or technology, or geometry, then this book might encourage you to dive deeper into a particular subject area. But as a book, it's just kind of, general. Islam. I actually, I don't really care for the DK Eyewitness books very much. However, I found this one to be fairly accurate and informative and enjoyable, and I'm super surprised because I have been purging my books of the DK Eyewitness books, not because they're wrong or, anything like that. It's just because we haven't felt engaged by them. I haven't found them interesting. I don't really like the way they're written, in that there's just the paragraph, that's it, and then a lot of captions, a lot of photographs, maybe some illustrations, and that each section doesn't really relate to the other section. I prefer a narrative. However, I found this one to be really well done. We learned a lot, and the way that we approached this book is that we would read a 2-page spread every day of our unit, and sometimes we would read more in order to finish the book within the unit. And then, so I would read this beginning part, and then each of my children and myself would choose one caption or illustration to read more about. Sometimes we would read more. Rather than reading every single part of the book, my daughter might be interested in this. I might read something about this. Like, I might say, oh, I'm interested in this. My daughter might be interested in this. My son might be interested in this. And then we would read those sections, and then we would move on. So we didn't read it cover to cover necessarily, but we did read every 2-page spread with the parts that interested us of these little extra captions. And I found that to be a really great way to do this book, because then my daughter was definitely interested in knowing more, because she chose the little part that she wanted to read more about. And then these paragraphs are a very quick read. They don't take more than a couple of minutes. And again, this gives you a nice overview of this time period, these locations, the dress, the rules, the food, the heritage. It gives you a nice overview, and then a lot of original resources. Not exactly. I appreciate the photographs, is what I should say, and I prefer illustrations usually, but I appreciate the photographs for this book. So I actually like this one, where mostly I would tell you that I don't really care for the DK Eyewitness books. Tell Me About Yusuf. This is another one in the series. I really, really enjoyed it for the same reasons why I enjoyed Tell Me About Musa. I like the way that it's written. I love the illustrations. And of course, I love the additional information on the sides or throughout the pages that's not part of the narrative, but it gives you additional information or context or something historical about the book. Or about the story, I apologize. On a medieval day, there were 2 stories in here that specifically related to the Islamic Golden Age, and so we read those ones. It was Kufi's Adventure, so this is in Timbuktu and Mali Empire in 1345. We also read Jamal and the Doctor. This is Baghdad in Islamic Empire 905, and it tells you, like, in this case, it's the story of Dr. Al-Khazi, and in this case, it's the story about a trade center and a marketplace. There are other stories in here that span other areas of the world during the Middle Ages. My daughter really, really likes this book because it's written from not the perspective of a child, but it's written about a child in a typical day in their life, different areas of the world, going through different things. So we also read Hannah's Wedding, and this is in China in the Tang Dynasty in 740. And it was all about this young woman getting married and her whole day. And so it tells you a little bit about the traditions, but it's really connecting the child, the person who's reading this book to that person. And because this is written for children, you're really feeling connected, because you can, in my opinion, you can imagine yourself as that child going through that typical day in their life. So I do really enjoy this book. We've read this before for our Middle Ages unit, and this really inspired us to do our entire Silk Road unit separate from the European approach, because it went through so many different areas of the world during the Middle Ages, and it explored the golden age of other parts of the world while the Europe was going through its dark ages. Okay, so we have 1001 Arabian Nights, and I was really hesitant to include this because this is not Islamic tradition. We don't have fairy tales, we don't have folk tales, and most of these stories include a lot of things that are not correct Islamically. I did include them here. We have read through this book now 2 or 3 times, and we enjoy some of the stories. It's because we're Muslim, we can definitely point out the aspects that are incorrect, so it's an opportunity to discuss those things. The whole foundation of this book about killing a wife every night so she can't cheat on her husband is, in my opinion, awful, and it's not something that I would want to expose my children to. And yet this is like popular folk tales. And so part of it is like, well, we need to talk about what's popular culture, popular folk tales, popular, for the sake of general knowledge. And at the same time, exposing how this is maybe not part of Islam, or this is incorrect, or, things like that. So I can't say that I would recommend reading these books. I can just say that I can share my thoughts that some of the stories were enjoyable, some of them were just really wrong Islamically. This is not related to Islam. These are not Islamic folktales. I do believe that these originated in Persia prior to Islam, and it has been adopted because Islam spread. So whereas Muslims may have adopted things in other countries, it doesn't mean that it was adopted Islamically. So I just want to point that out. Okay, Isabel, a Muslim girl of Spain. We had this book when we did our Ibn Batuta unit, and we actually didn't get to read it for that unit. We read it for this unit, and it was amazing. We loved this book. Now, we read this book after the Khadija book, and so that Khadija book was so well done that when we first read the first couple chapters in this book, my daughter did not like it at all. She was just still on the high of this other book, and she didn't like this book at all, and we almost put it aside and didn't finish reading it. I said, let's just read 3 chapters and then we'll decide. By the 3rd chapter, she was fully engaged. It ended up being an amazingly written book. We really enjoyed it, and now I want to look for other books by the same author, Yahya Emmerich. You notice that he also wrote one of the original books I shared with you earlier on in this video. So I really, really highly recommend this book. I think it was really, really well done. The Genius of Islam, How Muslims Made the Modern World. I had a lot of problems with this book. Now, let me tell you about the nice things in this book before I start to rip it apart. The illustrations are beautiful. The science behind it, in my opinion, is accurate. It goes through a lot of different either discoveries or improvements on scientific technology and discoveries that were made. I found it to be valuable in that sense. What I did not appreciate, which I had a huge problem with, is all of the commentary and the unrelated connections that are not accurate that the author makes throughout the beginning parts of the introduction to each of these different scientific discoveries or improvements, as well as the parts that are in the beginning of the book. That part I had a huge problem with. They are not correct. It's a really big problem. I'm just going to point out one aspect, which is really small, but it just kind of gives you an idea. Striking up a band. This has to do with music. A lot of Muslims have varying opinions about which musical instruments are acceptable Islamically. So to begin with, without Islam, Western music would be unrecognizable. That is incorrect. Islam doesn't have a musical exactly tradition. We have singing, we have the drums, but we don't have a musical tradition with other musical instruments. Muslims themselves may have carried and did carry musical traditions from ancient India, ancient Persia through the Islamic Empire up to modern age. That is accurate. But to say that it's because of Islam, that is wholly inaccurate. Maybe because of Muslims, we have, Plato, Aristotle, Roman and Greek philosophy. Yes, because of Muslims translating those texts, we have those, but it's not because it contains Islamic ideals, for instance. And so again, with the music, yes, Muslims, were the conduit to carry those ancient traditions into the modern world, but it's not because of Islam. So I know it seems subtle and it seems like, well, you're just splitting hairs there. But for me, it is important to distinguish what Islam is as a religion, as a way of life, as a complete system versus what Muslims do and what Muslims have, say, discovered, improved upon, preserved. While there can be a connection, there is, it's important that we separate them so that we're very clear on what Islam is versus what Muslims do. And I know that sometimes we only have what Muslims do as a reflection of what Islam is. I understand that completely. It's just there's so much misinformation out there. It's really important that we're very clear on it. And having secular books makes it difficult. Having Muslim books too. There are going to be mistakes Muslim authors are going to make for a Muslim audience. Absolutely. You're not going to find a perfect book out there. But sometimes when you have a book written like this that has a lot of misinformation or biases at the beginning of the book that then has a lot of really great content later on, it can be very confusing. I can't say whether I would recommend or not recommend this book. I just think you need to read it with a critical eye. And if you're unsure about something, ask someone to explain it. I think that's completely okay. I don't want to just say, this book is not allowed. This book, should be thrown out. Like that's not my opinion. My opinion is to learn how to read books with the mistakes so that you become skilled in reading through that, understanding authors' biases. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Understanding motivations, understanding context, understanding the actual history. It's really important that we hone those skills rather than expect perfection from every book so that we don't have to even evaluate the resource. Tell me about Prophet Muhammad. We have read this book before, but we did not read it as part of this unit, but I have included it as part of this unit now that I have shifted from having only secular options to having options that are written by Muslims primarily for a Muslim audience. I'm just finding them to be more valuable for a general audience. So this one again has the same kind of beautiful writing, the lovely illustrations, and the additional information on the pages. The last book I want to share, oh my goodness, the last book? Wow. The last book I want to share with you currently. You can find any book that I have added to this unit on the blog post that accompanies this unit, or this video. Camels. I have this book on camels, and I think that if you want to take this Islamic unit and focus on, say, the science, the biographies, the geography, the animals of the region, then this book is going to help you with specifically the camel. And it is stereotypical to talk about camels and, say, Arabs or Muslims, but there is far more value in understanding the role of this animal in the society of the time, both in the caravan, in war, in food, in transportation. It's really important to understand it from that perspective, the same way you might learn about transportation, technology. This is important to understand how it functioned within society and how people used the camel with trade, with war, and with other things. So we've included this. This is the only book I have on camels. I don't know how it compares to other books. I apologize, but I would say don't overlook looking at the animals of the region, the agriculture of, different regions under the Islamic Golden Age of Islam, the Islamic Empire. You can explore waterways. You can explore, different, like the botany of different areas, the forests, the deserts. There are so much you can explore depending on your interests. I want to just remind you, you probably already know, but I want to remind you that there are so many different ways that you can explore a unit like this or any other unit. I'm going to very quickly share with you some of the projects that we did for this unit. You can find all of the tutorials on the playlist that accompanies this video. This is DIY Dome of the Rock Jerusalem. This is a foam building kit. It's very, very beautiful, but it is very fragile in the sense that foam bends easily. We do have older children now, so I don't mind including these things that would otherwise be more challenging if you've got toddlers and young children. My 14-year-old assembled this within about 40 minutes. It was a pretty easy assembly. It's very beautiful, and this will be part of our decorations in our homeschool room. We do a lot of hands-on projects for our units, and so this one will accompany those projects. We also did our Kaaba using plaster of Paris and some silicone building materials like a mold for the bricks. We repurposed a building kit that we use for our Middle Ages unit for making a castle. So you can also find other materials in order to create this. We did not use a kit. We just kind of put this together using other kits and other materials. We also made our sandstone masjid, and that coordinated with our unit on Mansa Musa. But again, with a unit like this spanning so many years and so many different locations, you could include that as well. You don't have to just do a unit on Mansa Musa. And for our other projects and tutorials, don't forget to check out the playlist that accompanies this video. I want to share with you just 2 opening activity projects that were not shared initially with this because, again, I was using secular materials, but this one is called Junior Quran Challenge, and this is a board game that my children and I love to play. It is a trivia-based board game, and I don't particularly like trivia-based board games because if you don't know enough information to begin with, these can be very disheartening and challenging. However, because we know enough and because we learned through the game, this is a very enjoyable game for us. It comes with a number of questions that are divided up into different categories, as well as your little marker thing. And I can't remember if it comes with a dice or not. Oh no, you just move forward. Yes, because some Muslims do not play games with dice, so you just move forward is how you move throughout the book. Throughout the game, and then you have your questions. They also, I believe, have Quran Challenge. This is Junior Quran Challenge, and there's also Hadith Challenge, which I found to be super challenging and not as enjoyable since we didn't know as much when it came to the Hadith Challenge. So I do recommend this game for a Muslim audience. I do not recommend this game for a non-Muslim audience. And then the last thing I want to share with you is this game here called Names of Allah. This is a memory game. There are multiple games in this series. I think there are 5 in total that take you through all the 99 names of Allah. There's also another one that has all 99 names in one game. Now, this one includes pictures and the Arabic and the English. This is again for a Muslim audience. I would not recommend having this for a non-Muslim. Absolutely you can, but this is definitely made for a Muslim audience. This is a memory matching game. It goes through the 99 names of Allah. It does include some illustrations with which you may or may not agree with, and then it has the Arabic transliteration, the Arabic, and then the rough translation. This is a good translation, but it is a poor method to translate the name of Allah. Like, it's not going to be contained in just a simple translation. It is far deeper, greater, more expansive than just a simple translation. But for ease of just explanation and the fact that many of us, or I am not Arabic speaking, I do appreciate having the English translation as well. So this is a really, really nicely made board game. The pieces are really nice. They're nice and durable. I like the illustrations. It's a fun game to play. It doesn't have too many pieces. So if you want the rest of the names of Allah, then you can look into the other games that are part of this series. I believe there are 5 right now, and it is made for children 3 and up. All right, I think that covers it. Thank you so much for joining me on this review video. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to check out the blog post that accompanies this video for more information. You can find that link down in the description box below. If you'd like to check out some of our other Silk Road and Islamic Empire main lesson blocks and playlists, you can tap on the screen right now. Those playlist links are also in the description box below. And if you'd like to see how we are homeschooling on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.